What if your journey to success has been sabotaged by self-abandonment? I'm Stacey Luces. This is Beyond the Quo, where we delve into redefining success on our own terms, unraveling what it means to live authentically beyond societal expectations, and how can we live more courageously. Today's guest is Dr. Kelly Kessler. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And through her own journey of breaking free from perfectionism and people pleasing, oh my goodness, I can't wait to dive into those. Kelly has totally become a guiding light for those ready to reconnect with their inner strength. Kelly's a licensed physical therapist, transformation coach, and she's the host of Rewiring Health. Kelly is also an advocate for helping high-achieving women who are ready to step out of survival mode, embrace self-worth, and transform unrelenting stress into inner peace. I have to say, Kelly, one of the first things, so we met probably about a little over a year ago. And one of the first things that stood out to me was you had an innate sense of like calm about you. So I totally, what I just said there about you in real life, well, as much as in real life can be via Zoom and having a virtual friendship, I feel like you embody that. But tell us a little bit about, I guess one thing that struck me in this introduction, and it may have struck other people too, is this word self-abandonment. Like it's so, we never like to think that we've abandoned ourselves. Like that word itself is like, no, not me. But talk to me about how that particular phrase works in this situation.
Yeah, so I think the hard part is that we don't even realize we're doing this as we're doing it.
Yeah.
It just becomes this like protective mode, these subconscious beliefs that we develop, and a sense of creating safety when we try to control and try to adapt our external environment. But what happens when we do that is that we really lose ourselves in the process. And for me, it came in so many forms of feeling like I had to be perfect. So everything had to be just so, like I had to have perfect grades. I had to look a certain way in order to feel like I was worthy. I would do really well on things, but I would focus on the one little thing that went wrong. And so I was just so focused on just this unattainable standard for myself that it just left me feeling like I'm just not enough. And I look back at my life and realize that has been an overarching theme of my life, like I'm not enough. And so I abandoned myself to try to feel like I was enough. And I did this in relationships, feeling like other people's opinions mattered more than my own, other people's values mattered more than my own, trying to make sure everything was smooth, even if it meant sacrificing myself. I would stay silent in situations when I really should have spoken up for myself. And it also came in this feeling like I had to constantly achieve. Like I had to be productive, otherwise it was a waste of a day.
For sure.
And then when I took any time, there would be this sense of guilt, like, who are you to like take a moment for yourself?
You
had
to earn it. You had to earn the time. Like you had to do the thing to make the grade and then earn the time.
Exactly.
I totally. So you're not alone. I'm not alone. Whomever's listening to this and it sort of hit you in the gut, you're not alone. And I'll give you some stats to support this, right? So these two sides of a coin, self-abandonment and perfectionism, and the kind of this quest for perfectionism, it has kept many of us in survival mode. I would say that studies show that over 33%, that's a third of us, high-achieving individuals, struggle with perfectionism. It is a mindset that has long-term, most of the times it's like a dramatic consequence that gets us to pay attention, right? But a lot of times there's like chronic stress, burnout, and serious health issues. I know if you followed along with me, and certainly Kelly, we're going to hear from you, the long-term health issues are what stops many of us in our tracks, because sometimes it's too late, right? We've developed some kind of autoimmune or some longer-term thing, but also it is it's our body's way of like screaming after maybe sending tiny little blips, leading up to it. The other thing is 60% of us are struggling with depression and anxiety. That is a lot. And I'm talking specifically about midlife women, so 38 to 50, late 50s, right? That's more than half of us. And Kelly, you really do a phenomenal job. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, Rewiring Health. Congratulations on it being so successful.
Oh,
and you share so many tools that help high achievers. But before we dive into those, if you could rewrite one rule about success slash wanting to be perfect, what would that be?
That's so good. That's such a good question. I think what I would do, because I would say that you do not have to continue to push and push and push and push and force it to happen. You have to allow yourself to allow things to flow and be able to receive and be able to slow down and trust yourself and trust the process and really tune into yourself along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I will tell you that one of the hardest things, and I met with a client 3 days ago, and I think when people think that we are coaches and healers and we are training people on different modalities of how to be successful, that it is that we have perfected it, that we are on the other side of something. And I had to reemphasize to her that it is always a process. And I'll speak for myself, and I know you probably feel the same way. We are a work in progress every day, right? When we first started chit-chatting before the podcast, we were even talking about the weather and just talking about how our kids show up differently for brutal cold, right? Some of them are like, wee, and some of them are like, yuck, get me out of this. And so adapting not only our parenting skills, adapting our routine for the morning, adapting how they're going to show up and our own energy, even if we are tired, like it is a constant effort. And I want to dive into something when you talked about redefining success and you talked about that mindset and having trust with ourselves. I want to say that for many of us that have self-sabotaged, and for me, it was probably decades. And it wasn't in the form of not being successful. I was, in fact, ultra successful, which I'm sure all of the women that show up on your doorstep are also. But it was the fact that was the priority, and the lesser priority, or not even a priority, was our own well-being and health and our own state of self. And one of the things I talk to this client about, and I talk a lot about in general, is this concept of having integrity with yourself and keeping your own promises to yourself. Simple things, staying hydrated, going to the gym, like whatever, physical activity, spending time with your partner or your loved ones, and making that a priority. When we put these things last, there has to be a consequence in that we can't even trust ourselves. And to me, that's the most, every time I think about that, even decades into self-healing work, it stops me in my tracks, because literally every day, to some extent, being totally vulnerable here and transparent, I break a promise to myself every day. And if that were somebody else, whether it was a client or a business partner, and they were slowly eroding that trust, every day you break a promise to me, I would not trust you. So ergo, how can I trust myself, right? But talk to me about how that journey can look for people that this resonated with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can sacrifice ourselves so much in an effort to feel like we belong outside ourselves, that we no longer belong to ourselves. And we define success often by looking outside ourselves, like how much money do we have? How thin are we? How much do we match the quote standard of what we're supposed to look like and be like? Do we find that people are drawn to us, or we find that they are
Exhausted after talking to us?
What's that?
I said they're exhausted after meeting us. They're like, wow, that was a lot.
We base off of like their approval. So we're always looking outside ourselves for this validation of like, okay, yes, I'm enough. And we think that when we get to that certain level, that certain job, that whatever standard we think that it's going to be, then we're going to feel this sense of fulfillment. But often it's the opposite. When we're defining ourselves only externally, we often relinquish those internal bonds with ourselves, that internal belonging. And then we get to that level where we think we're going to feel good. Maybe it's that job, the promotion, the finances, the body appearance. And then we get there and we're like, okay, well, where's the feeling that I thought was
Yeah.
going to be here all along? And then it's
Yeah.
a bigger letdown because now you've invested maybe decades, you've invested energy, you've invested so much of your life, sacrificing time after time, sacrificing yourself, you're exhausted, you're burning the candle at both flames, and you get there and you're thinking like, okay, this is it. And now where do you go? And that is often that definition of success that we look at. But we're not looking at the success within ourselves. And you talked about integrity. That's a huge part of
Yeah.
that, of knowing that we are hearing and seeing ourselves, that we are acknowledging our needs. You think about a child, if a child is like, I'm cold, and you're like, nah, I'm just going to ignore you.
I
I'm
know.
hungry.
We would never do
Never
that.
mind.
We would never
like,
do it.
and then we're like, I need to talk to you.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm going to ignore you. How would that child feel? And that's exactly how you feel. And that's why you feel unfulfilled, because you're not even acknowledging your own needs. You're continuing to push and push and push and keep yourself going. And meanwhile, internally, you're screaming like, I need something else. And that's that sense of like emptiness you get when you get to that place.
Yeah.
That's those health impacts that you start experiencing. That's that feeling like you're so wound up tight that you're like ready to burst on somebody. You have no tolerance for anything.
And we bring that home. Like we bring it home because we've had to like perform all day.
Yes.
And then when we come home and the tank is fuming on E, right? Running on fumes, and the people we love the most have to deal with that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. And then there becomes that sense of guilt because cognitively of like, okay, I know I'm being irrational, but you're so in survival mode and in stress mode that you don't even have that wherewithal to like pause and like say, okay, how do I want to feel in my life? What do I need in this moment? It's just that like go, 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 go. Then you have to deal with the guilt, and it becomes this cycle where you're constantly dealing with these lower emotions, these lower energies, and you're feeling like, okay, at what point do I get to take care of myself? Because it's like you're on a treadmill that you just can't keep up with.
For sure. I want to talk a little bit about strategies that you use to help women through this. Now, a strategy I use along the lines of keeping promises and having integrity with yourself is that I ask women, 30 days, they say 21 days, 30 days is how long it takes to break a habit and make a habit, right? Some people say 90, whatever. I think 30 is kind of enough for you to have some sort of positive reinforcement and understand that if I continue to do this, I'm going to see incremental until there's like a shift, right? One of the things I ask women to do within the first 30 days of my coaching program is to assume, I ask them, and I'll ask you, what is a guardian? Like if I introduced you to a child, what would be the guardian role for this child?
A protector, someone who's looking out for their best interests.
Yeah. And so I ask them and I make them write a letter to themselves, like a contract. And I said, I want you to assume guardianship for yourself. And you're going to, in that guardianship role, because all of us will take that seriously if it were an external force, a party. I said, in that role of external guardianship, you're going to do basic things. Food, water, movement, listening, right? However that is. And so it's nothing dramatic, but their faces, when I ask them to assume that role, it's both parts hopeful and both parts, the other side of that is a little bit scared. Because I think that confrontation and that, I should say actually the reckoning of the truth of just how far you are from any kind of basic guardianship role over your own self, it just strikes the breath from you. What's what's a strategy that we can share in your modality that you use to help women?
So big thing I really focus on is getting out of our mind and tuning into our body. So we are often so disconnected from our body because we've shut down the signals from our body. When we are hungry, we ignore it. When we're thirsty, we ignore it. When we're tired and our butt's numb, we ignore it. So we become very disconnected from ourselves.
My butt's numb right now.
Yeah, I mean, but when you do this chronically over and over and over again, become disconnected from what is my body telling me, what do I need? You can often ask, women, what do you need in this moment? They would really have a hard time answering that in many cases. And so I help them move from their mind to their body. And one way I do that is like, let's notice what your body feels like in a stress state. And notice what your body feels like in a calm, relaxed state. And let's get in tune with that, because then we can really sense, where am I and what do I need in this moment? If I'm so used to being stressed out and I don't know what it feels like in my body because I'm just used to that, and I don't know what it feels like to feel calm, then there's going to be a big discrepancy in understanding what we actually need in that moment. So I have them tune into their body. Where are you feeling any sensations, any tension? And then recognizing moments in their life when they have stress. Okay, tune into your body in that moment and just do a scan, a non-judgmental scan. What are you feeling? And then when you have a moment of like calm and relaxation, how does that feel for you? And then start to be able to differentiate which each of those are, so that you know how to move yourself into more of a relaxed state.
Yeah. And for those of us that are very tactile, like you kind of want an example. What Kelly's describing about tuning into your body, I will give you a perfect example for myself, because I totally functioned on autopilot for so long, doing all the things, and was out of tune with just me, right? The essence of Stacey. And for me, how that manifested, and I totally downplayed that because shit, you had to get on with the business of your day. But how it manifested was my cheeks felt a little bit warmer. And so that's kind of my biometric, if you will, of something feels off. Whether it was a conversation or a decision or maybe a feeling within myself of, I don't know, imposter syndrome or whatever felt out of alignment in the moment that it was happening, my cheeks, like the heat in my cheeks gave it away. But a lot of times I would just ignore that because so many other things were hurting. Seriously, my back, my shoulders, I had a mild headache because you're walking around dehydrated, right? So when Kelly talks about getting to the point where you are taking breath and taking time and getting in alignment with your body, I'm sure, Kelly, it shows up for you differently, but what are some other things women can, like, more normal? I know some people experience like a tightness in their chest, or your throat feels a little bit like a panic attack, like you can't breathe, or whatever it is. But how can they work through that if they've identified, like for me, if my cheeks get really hot, I know I'm uncomfortable about something, and I will literally like internally just walk myself through a couple of breaths. But what are some other things you've seen and some other ways they can work through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you bring up a good point, because it's not all one size fits all.
Yeah.
Like, my body is going to react in a certain way and your body's going to react in a certain way. And women I work with, their bodies react in different ways.
Yeah.
And it's knowing yourself enough to be like, oh, that's my signal.
Bingo.
And so it may not look the same as ours. So that's why tuning into it is so important, to get those signals of like, that's my body telling me it needs something. And so in that moment, that's when you want to acknowledge it and give yourself a moment of pause. And so I know this can be really challenging, especially when you have demands, but the next moment you have, just give yourself 2 or 3 minutes throughout the day and really tune into that. So breath is a great access point. So we often breathe very shallow and quickly when we're stressed, which will only contribute to that stress response. So if you can do a deep belly breath and even say to yourself, I've got you. I've got you in this moment. I'm here for you, and I acknowledge it, and send love to that area that you're feeling it. And it may seem so silly if you've never done this before, but saying to yourself, I've got you, I'm telling you, that literally makes such a difference, because it's maybe the first time your body and your system has felt like it's been heard in years. And when you start to acknowledge this and yourself, it brings you a sense of peace and knowing that like you're going to take care of yourself in this moment, and a sense of safety. And when you do that consistently, that's when you start to rewire your pathways, and that's when you start to create a different experience for yourself. And that's when your body starts to become more relaxed and calm, because it's like, she's going to take care of me in this moment. I know it. versus maybe what you've been doing for the past decade of like, she's going to ignore me. I got to yell louder. I got to let her know that this is not, I'm not being heard. So when you see that transition of like, I've got you, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to take a moment of pause, really lean into that, and maybe ask yourself, what are you trying to tell me? What do I need to know in this moment? You may not have the answers, but just asking those questions acknowledges that you are noticing what's going on in your body and you're going to move in a different direction.
And as with anything, it's like building a muscle, right? Like none of us are perfect at this. We're all trying to figure it out. I want to, this is going to sound like a weird question. I want to talk to the Kelly from a couple of years ago. The Kelly in corporate, right? Like small kids, job that feels tenuous. Like talk to me as that Kelly, because you know, when I speak to potential clients, I have to remember that I'm a couple of years ahead, right? And I have to kind of put myself back in their shoes, because sometimes when I'm speaking about these things, I loved what you said about if that's not normal for you or it feels weird. Yes, it absolutely will feel, you're going to feel a little bit woo and like, okay, what is this about? But take me back to the woman that are earlier versions of Stacey and Kelly. Especially in your work as a physical therapist, where you see a physical manifestation of a broken down body in dis-ease resulting from so many things. How is the Kelly a couple of years ago, like what state is she in? And then talk about, and maybe pick 3 things, and then that transformation, like, because right, we're creating like a journey, but people need to understand that we get the before, like we are the before. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I was there, and it is an evolving journey. There's still things I have to work through, and I'm always going to be working through things. But say about 6-7 years ago, I was, my husband and I were building our house. I was pregnant with my first son. I was working as a physical therapist full time, driving an hour each way, also working part time as an adjunct professor at the same time. We were the general contractors in our house, building our house. So I mean, I'm telling you, like I would leave at like 5 a.m., get home at 5:30, and then have to go to the property and make sure everything's working well to get this house built. And meanwhile, being pregnant, lifting logs at 8 months pregnant to get it off so we could get our house placed. I mean, I was exhausting myself at every level. And I never acknowledged myself. I was just like, you have to keep going. You have a baby on the way. You got to get this house built. There's a time crunch. You can't quit your job because you have to have the mortgage for it. You can't slow down because you got to have enough money, because money was just going out like crazy. And I just was relentless with myself. I was, you need to work harder. You need to do more. And meanwhile, I was dealing with some relationship issues in some close relationships that was going on. And I was just going into a fawn response. And because it was like, the only thing that felt safe is like, okay, I'm just going to stay silent. I'm not going to ruffle any feathers, because I'll just appease them. I'll say what I need to say just to get things over. And that's how I lived. I lived in so much survival mode. I had chronic back pain to the point where we were celebrating our 1-month anniversary. I got out of the car and I had to like walk myself up my legs, hunched over, just trying to get into the hotel. I got into the pool and I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels like such a relief. Got out, and then it just, I couldn't even walk. My legs were like shooting pain down it. And I'm like, what is, like, I was just so defeated, so defeated. I was in a very victim mindset of like, what else is going to happen? You know, how, like, what else am I going to go through? And I felt like I had no way to help myself in that moment. I was just completely depleted, but yet felt like there's no give. You have to show up. You have to keep going. There's no time to like take a moment for yourself. And for me, that was me several years ago, and I hit a head when I got furloughed from my job. My husband got furloughed from his job. I had a 9-month-old son. We were in our house at that point. I'm sitting on the ground, and I'm like, where have I been? I missed the first 9 months of my kid's life. I was physically there, mentally totally checked out. And it was in that moment, I'm like, I can't live like this anymore. I just can't. And
I want to put a pin, just a moment of silence, like for that, because, and if some of you need to rewind that, because Kelly just explained your life. Maybe not apples to apples, but definitely the same tree.
Yeah.
That is the reality that many of us are accepting right now. And when I talk about kind of the work that I do, and I deeply appreciate and honor the work that you do. And most of my guests end up talking about this, and it's all the same basic recipe. It's all the same basic food groups.
Yeah.
Can you tell I haven't had breakfast? I'm talking about food. But when people kind of minimize rather, breath work, meditation, planning your day, making time for connection, a bubble bath, whatever, right? Leaving situations, jobs, relationships that are killing us. But because we've become so used to that pain, it's the new normal. Yeah. That's crazy. But my story's 100% similar to yours, different names, different whatever. But for me, it manifested in my hair dropping out, gaining, and I used to say suddenly gaining 30 pounds. No, it was just my adrenal system and every other system, circulatory, lymphatic, everything just gave up. And I'm a data analyst in my past life too. So data and evidence to me is really important. And when I looked at my blood work and everything was red, everything was out of bounds. And I sat with that. It was like 20 markers. I was like, Jesus, like, how do I recover from that? And I feel like just listening to you too, I can feel all of that stuff coming back up for me because I have so much compassion for her, for young you and young me. And when we say 100%. Young, we're not talking about age at all. We're talking about the version of us that didn't know better. And so much compassion because we don't have to live like that, for crying out loud, right? So talk to me about maybe the 3 most pivotal, right? You're furloughed, you're in the thick of it, babies, all of that stuff. And this goes for people without kids too. Like we can all agree this isn't a mom thing, right? It's a human experience. But what were the transformational shifts getting you to the Kelly that you are now, right? Still in the process, but certainly not that earlier version of yourself.
Yeah, for me, it was exposing myself to new things.
Yeah.
So I was never like a reader for pleasure. I was always like reading for school,
Or
but
for work.
just started reading and like old textbooks, but then started reading at that time, listening to podcasts, just getting exposed to different things. So it just started planting seeds of like, oh, that's interesting.
I love that.
And then it would kind of like open up the next door, it'd be like the breadcrumb, and just being receptive and open, being like, okay, my back is against the wall. I am hitting my rock bottom. I am open to anything. So it's just being receptive and open to just something different, trying it out and then seeing how I felt. And often, what I started with was the breath work, slowing down. I was doing yoga, like YouTube yoga videos. And I'm like, oh, I actually like feel pretty good. Like there was just like a little bit of levity in my body and feeling just like, oh, that feels a little bit better. There's nothing that's like big change overall, but like that feels a little good, so I would just kind of go that path. And then I found that would expose me to something else. And I'm like, let me just check that out. And I felt like I truly believe the universe puts in our life whatever we need to find and whatever we need to hear. And I felt like that was happening. I started to, and I didn't believe that back then. I didn't see that, but in hindsight, I can see that the resources that I needed were being put in my life. And all I had to do was just say, yes, I'm worth it.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm worth it. Okay, yes, I'm worth it. And it was just these little bite-sized pieces. And one thing that was really transformational to me was like leaning into that discomfort. So, okay, this is different. This is uncomfortable. This is something I haven't done. Okay, let me just go into it. And knowing, like being exposed to this podcast I was listening to, that discomfort is good. Okay, and so all these things just started to change the way I was thinking. And I can literally see how my brain over the course of those years was getting rewired. The way I view myself, I view my world, I view relationships is so different than the lens I was seeing life through back then.
Yes.
I feel like it's a different person. When I talk about that Kelly,
Me too.
I'm like, who is she? Like, and
Yeah.
I give my younger self so much love
Yeah.
because I'm like, I'm sorry you didn't know better, but
Yeah.
this Kelly's gonna take care of you
Yeah.
because this Kelly knows better.
Back to that thing you were saying about I've got you, right? Like I've got
Hmm.
you. And for me,
Hmm.
I say I talk about the universe has your back. Like that's the
Hmm.
phrase I use. So when I'm
Yeah.
going into a situation where I'm feeling like these old perfectionism, like people, all these tendencies to come up to want to please and all of those things, I'm like, we've got you. Like if it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. And I think it's that, I had heard, so I went to, I was certified through the Tony Robbins group, strategic intervention coaching. And the reason I wanted to have that on top of everything else was specifically for two things. And you mentioned it just now. One of it is it's not a lack of, the way I say it is it's not a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness. And when you were talking about the baby steps, and I love this thing you said, bite-sized pieces, right? You didn't try to consume the whole buffet, like, right? But
Yeah.
it's, I'm going to find and have access to and put myself in proximity to all of the
Hmm.
things that look, feel, sound different than what I am exposed to now, changing those environmental factors. And I always say to people, there's still public libraries. Hello. You've got a phone, you can Google top 10 X books
Hmm.
based on whatever it is you're going through and go to the library and you can still get those for gasp free.
Hmm.
Podcasts are free. I haven't charged anybody for this, nor have you. I'm being a bit of an ass right now, but you have access to information and experts and these stories, right? The depth of, like, somebody's like, you're so open. And I'm like, well, that didn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
Just like sharing your story, it becomes a muscle where we are okay with telling our truth about where we were to inspire, support, whatever.
Hmm.
People that think, oh, well, it's easy for you to say because you have XYZ. It's not. The
Hmm.
trenches are the trenches. And then the second thing you said, which I really loved here, was you were having a hard time with the people in your life. You didn't, I'm paraphrasing, but I want to
Hmm.
dig into that a little bit more because as you elevate yourself and your thinking and your health, and you start saying, hey, I don't want to go to that happy hour, I've got to go to yoga, or I want to, whatever, you're going to
Hmm.
meet resistance. If you start
Hmm.
telling, that supervisor that, hey, for the last 8 years, I'm the last one to leave the office and I'm the first one to skip lunch every single time. Now I'm going to take my 30 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk or I'm going to leave, on time. And then if there are exceptions and we're under a time crunch, I'm happy to support the team. You're going
Hmm.
to be met with a ton of disappointment,
Hmm.
resistance, judgment from other people. And the point I want to say, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, is because your decision to serve yourself first is not serving their priorities
Yeah.
and their benefit anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And even as you're saying this and you're saying it like I'm tuning into my body right now, like
Mm,
just hearing that, like
yes, me
my
too.
heart's starting to like I can
It's
feel it
like
in my body because I've
PTSD.
just gone through in this past year like a really unraveling of some
Yeah.
significant relationships in my life.
Yeah.
And because of me really recognizing my own
Oh, I
worth.
have full chills. Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I can feel it's still in my body. And this is where my work is coming in. Like, I'm still processing this because this has
Yeah.
been a lot for me to handle in this past year. But I do not regret anything because it was all out of love for myself. And I realized I was not respecting myself for
Mm,
several years in certain relationships. I didn't, and like I was kind of sharing earlier, I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't
mm,
take care of myself. I didn't align myself with my values. I was aligning with everybody else's.
yeah.
And the minute I stood up for myself, unfortunately, those relationships came to a crashing halt.
Wow.
And I've been dealing with significant grief over that.
Yeah.
And so that's where these emotions can coexist that like it is a huge grieving process when you go through this. So as you start to love yourself and take your own energy back, like just know that grief will naturally come because you are shedding the old version of yourself that fit
Mm,
into people's lives in a certain way. And now you are elevating yourself, you're recognizing your worth. And sometimes when you were relinquishing yourself and sacrificing yourself, you were fitting into someone else's life.
yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, it often kind of puts a mirror on the other person and kind of forces a change in the dynamic. And some people are not receptive to that. And that's
Mm,
really, really challenging. And sometimes relationships do fall apart in this. And in my circumstances, unfortunately, as a human person, I would not want this for my life, but as I believe my soul and my soul's purpose is to kind of is to learn how to love myself. And I feel
mm,
like this all happened for a reason. And as deep of a grieving process as it's been,
mm,
I can look back in so much gratitude because I've learned so much about myself, why I've struggled, many things that I've struggled with.
yeah.
I have, for the first time, really like taken my power back. I have a
Mm-hmm.
voice. I know I'm worthy of that voice. And now I know I had to go through all this because I'm here to help others through that.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been the
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenge of my life, but I know that everything serves a purpose. And so I just want to share that there's going to be grief in this. And so don't downplay the complexity and how hard it can be, but grief and love can coexist.
So I'm working on my second book, and
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, I feel like the one of the biggest parts of it was honoring who you were, and to for a large part of that is that core identity of yourself, like who you thought you were, but it really is a representation of who you created in order to fulfill whether it was the expectations of society or of parents or right whatever the good girl fantasy was, right, the happy ending, all of that drama that we're fed, the perfect body, like all of it, right? And I got super emotional just now because you're right? It's a process and it can bring up feelings. And I feel like, so I wrote down here, you will grieve as you grow.
Mm-hmm.
And the grief is going to come for different things, right? Whether it was the inspiration that maybe you had in college that led you to a career that you were in for 20 years and you're being paid so much money and you're unfulfilled. The
Mm-hmm.
relationship that you're in that isn't serving you as you grow, yet you've spent 12 years with this person and now you're looking at them like they're an alien from out of space and you're like, holy cow, man, like I don't know where to go from here. The children that are growing up real time,
Mm-hmm.
becoming young adults with their own opinions and their own ideals, and you're feeling that sense of grief because you're also growing, and you're like, well, how do I bridge this relationship gap? I feel like I'm sharing like what I feel like the book is going to culminate in. This is so, thank you. But
Mm-hmm.
how do you, and this is more of a rhetorical question. I think that for all of us, mastering growth and understanding that there is going to be grief, it's just part of the process of getting to a different leveling
Mm-hmm.
up, right? Um, Somebody said this and I really love it. They're like, oh, you got to bring main character energy to your life. And I was like, shit, right? Like, why are
Mm-hmm.
we the supporting role in our own life when we have main character energy that we have to fire up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I love
Yep.
what you said about owning your power. And, people shy away from that. I did a whole workshop. I think it was about 28 or 30 women, all different ages and backgrounds. And the topic was own your power. And my first question was, what does the word power mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
And it ran
Yeah.
the gamut. Even in that environment where we're all there, they know what I do for a living. Like, do you know what I mean? Like women's empowerment, leadership, growth, all of those things. But we all have a connotation for that word power,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
whether it's fear, who do you think you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Intimidated, fired up. When
Mm-hmm.
you say own your power and you sort of embody that in your life for your children and your circles and the work that you do, what comes to mind for you when you talk about owning your power, given what you just shared? the transformation and the transition you've been having, especially in the last year? Like, what comes up for you? Both the good and bad, because this isn't
Yeah.
Pollyanna, right? Like, we're just being real.
No, 100%. Yeah. For me, owning your power is aligning your thoughts, beliefs, behaviors with your values and your truths, even if they don't align with somebody else in your life. And for me, it's been loving myself and moving through life with love for myself and realizing I'm worthy of that. And I have always been that quote nice person, nice to a fault, like to where I would always, make sure everyone's taken care of and not really speak my truth. And for me, I've really had to become a villain in some other people's storylines. And that has been so uncomfortable to me because that was like the role I never wanted to be. I always wanted to be the person that got along with everybody. And so owning my truth is being okay with being the villain in someone else's story as long as I can be my own hero in my story. And that really has been where I anchor into, like, I will move forward for love for myself and with alignment of what feels authentically right for me, what feels freeing, what feels alive, and really giving my kids the gift of realizing that they can define themselves from within and not relying on the external world to say who they are.
Yeah. One of the most pivotal things you shared with me last year had to do with your brother, and kind of, I think you had hit your 100 episode, and I was either right before or right after that. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. But when you think about the legacy that he's left for you and why it empowers the work that you do, and you think about your kids who may not remember the earlier version of you, but certainly they're witnessing this this cocooning, right? Like, we haven't arrived fully, but we're getting there. When you think of the word legacy, like, what comes to mind for you?
You got me there. Yeah, my brother, I know he lives on through me. So my brother was always that person that you could trust 100%. He had your back.
Yeah.
You knew he was just love. Like, he was just pure love, but he was also like, he would just go after something. And he believed in himself to such an extent that he would just go after it. Like, he never questioned himself. He just did it. And he was the one that he helped me get my business started because he's like, why don't you just do it? Like, just do it. And so he's been such a catalyst in me, and like knowing that like he always had my back. And I truly believe his legacy carries on because he devoted his life to so many things and always, directed his energy outside of himself. And he struggled with really directing his energy within himself. And he self-sacrificed. He did a lot of the same self-abandonment that I did. And so I really believe that like part of this is recognizing that we don't know how long we have to live. And losing him at such an early age, like in the last year and a half, like I feel like I have to live even more fully now because he didn't have that opportunity to do that. And so like I think for me there's become this like sense of urgency that like you have to live now for yourself. Like, you don't know how long you have, and you have to get to the end of your life, like realize that like you were worthy of your own time and energy through every single moment. And so I truly believe that's my brother's legacy, and that's the message I take, is that like he was just love, and he was trust, and to trust yourself and to live life to the fullest. And that's what I carry on. I hope that continues, and I really believe like that's why I'm never stopping, because I'm so backed by like my brother, and I know he's still with me, and I know he supports me 100%, and I will never stop this mission so that other people can live their life fully.
I love that. Here. I think about that. For those of you who don't watch the actual recording of this on YouTube, we're both like crying. But for me, so there's two things. One, my own near-death experience, obviously, where I'm lucky, right? I could have easily been a case study like your brother. And so I totally understand that in my life. But two, I have been blessed that only elders in my life have passed. So you kind of expect it, right? But I recently had a friend pass in her prime. Cancer and, same kind of thing, burnout and redefining her life and reinventing and, God, riding the wave. But it was like for a year. And then she got sick. And so she lost her battle with cancer in October.
I'm so sorry.
But anyway, Rachel was amazing. And I say that to say the last thing she told me was, you better get out of your own fucking way with the things that you want to do. And I think if you don't have somebody in your life telling you get out of your own way, hopefully they use the F-bomb because it's more dramatic. But if you don't have somebody, and hopefully your story doesn't have to be as dramatic as Kelly and I's, in the sense of, right, that real life confrontation with loss. But you got to get out of your own way to do the things that you are meant to do. And I think that it involves hardship and change and pain and grief and feeling insecure, because a lot of us are experts and we're experts at what we did. And so now feeling like a novice feels gross. And maybe you won't make the kind of money you were making immediately. Maybe you won't have the network that you were. Maybe some of your friends will, these work buddies that we have, and your communities are going to shift. And all of the pieces feel like this Rubik's Cube. That's okay. I'm of the opinion that that's okay, because I understand how lucky I am every day. And a lot of you are not going to be that lucky. And so I love having guests like Kelly on my show that are walking the talk, but even more than that, are creating channels and mediums and using their voices and their experiences to impact true and relevant change, not only for the people that we serve, but for the generations that are coming up and want different things. And so it's really important. And thanks for sharing. I didn't mean to get us off on this emotional track.
It's, it's real. Like that's why this is so important. It's not just like, do it if it's convenient. Like, no, do it because you need to do it. Like, you need to know that you are worthy of a greater life. And the biggest regret would be to get to the end of this life and be like, I didn't bet on myself. I didn't take the chance.
I love that.
I didn't do it. And so do it. Like, you are worthy of it. And like, I know I was on that trajectory of just living in autopilot, doing all the things that other people wanted of me. And it's unfulfilling, and it will remain unfulfilling until you realize that you are here for something great. And you have to realize that, like, your story is going to be more than maybe what it's been, and just trust it. Trust yourself.
Yeah. We want to go beyond the quo. Status quo is where you hang out and like shrivel up and check out, right? So Kelly, thank you so much for being on and being so authentic. And I think you're the first guest that has me like heartfelt sobbing. I've come close quite a few times, but next time I'll bring napkins, right? I deeply appreciate you. Kelly and I have never met in person, but definitely I consider you a kindred spirit, and I cheer you on and all the great work that you're doing. But where can people find you in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to find me is on my website. It's optimalyou healthandwellness.com, or any social media platform under Dr. Kelly Kessler.
Awesome. So today, Kelly shared her powerful journey from self-abandonment to self-worth, demonstrating that when we stop living for external validation, we unlock a life that's aligned to our true values. She walked us through the difficult but rewarding process of unlearning old patterns like perfectionism and people-pleasing, which we're all familiar with, that has kept her and honestly keeps a lot of us in survival mode. Kelly's story reminds us that real change begins with small, intentional choices. I think you call it bite-sized pieces. I love that.
Yep.
And that by focusing on nervous system regulation, self-reflection, and tuning into our bodies, We can use very simple, practical, everyday tools to break free from cycles of stress and self-sacrifice. I hope that you know that all of our journeys didn't begin with some dramatic overnight shift. It was the culmination of years of erosion of ourselves and our health and our self. I'll just leave it at that. And then the rebuilding into some sort of healthier, more aligned, more passionate, more resilient version of who we were meant to be, right? Mm-hmm. And it involves a few things: boundaries, doing the work, remaining consistent, tuning in with your body, and getting support in whatever form or modality you want to. If today's episode resonated with you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. And also like, share, and subscribe to Kelly's podcast, Rewiring Health. I love it. I follow it. And step into your own journey and invite others along with you. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.